I am delighted to introduce you to Dr. Heather Palmer. Hi, Heather.
Hi, Lori. Thank you so much for the introduction. And you can hear me all right?
Perfect.
Perfect. Welcome, everybody. So thank you very much. What a huge group. Very, very flattered and touched, and really hoping that something from this presentation will help you to take the brain fog out of whatever fog you might be experiencing. So ultimately, the goal with tonight's presentation is to share my multidimensional approach to improving brain function with the hopes that you walk away with a few tips and suggestions, primarily to improve how you think, how you feel, and how you function. However, before we get started, I do want to look as a group at some cognitive challenge that this particular program is designed to address. So if you feel you're experiencing, or somebody you love or are supporting is experiencing any of these challenges, then perhaps there'll be something in today's presentation that will help. So some of the common cognitive challenges that we specifically developed this program to support are people who might be experiencing memory challenges. Now, these could be part of a normal cognitive aging process, but they could also be part of an abnormal aging process. So if there's disease or brain injury or something else that's going on. And specifically within memory, this program is designed to help address verbal skills. So lots of people will talk about changes that they've noticed in their verbal skills specifically. So coming up with a word or a name, just having it at the tip of your tongue, but not being able to pull it out until, of course, 3 in the morning when it's the most inopportune time. Attention. Some might be noticing that there's been changes in their attention and concentration as they get older. So perhaps the ability to maintain attention for as prolonged a period of time as they used to is a little bit more difficult. And then, of course, the big bucket area of executive functions, which is all of our frontal lobe, higher level functioning skills, such as our ability to do mental calculations or strategically process information, make decisions, plan, organize, multitasking. So many people, I can certainly tell you that myself in my 50s, I've already started to notice some changes in these functional areas for myself. Others might notice changes in motor function and coordination, so they feel a little bit steady on their feet, or their ability to grip and grab things is a little bit less skillful as it used to be. And that combined with spatial skills is the concept of where your body is relative to the space around you. So you might notice if you're driving that you're taking those turns a little bit too tight or too wide, or more difficulty parking, judging the space around you, or going through a door jam and perhaps bumping into people. And then the final area might be mood and psychological well-being. So if you, someone you are supporting is struggling with or noticing changes in any of these areas, then I do hope you'll walk away with some tips. But the first very fundamental step before we get into the multidimensional aspect of the program is self-awareness. So we are in the best possible position so we can make faster and better progress if you embark first upon a process of enhancing your own awareness of just where the cognitive challenges may be for you. And they will not necessarily be the same for those of your peers and friends and family around. So I did just list a whole bunch of different domains whereby one might be experiencing cognitive difficulty or noticing some of these cognitive challenges in their loved one. But really, to get the most out of this presentation, I want you to take a minute and just think about what specifically are the cognitive challenges you're facing, or what have you noticed that is different to the way it used to be. Or a third way of looking at it might be, where would you like to see some improvements? What areas of your own thinking skills would you like to be sharper than you currently are? And there are many ways to enhance your awareness. You can go very broad and just list out your cognitive concerns. In fact, we do this as an exercise where people just write down the first few things that come to mind that they'd like to be better at. It might be recalling people's names. It might be participating in conversations and social situations. It might be organizing a holiday meal. So just writing down, or as I'm known for saying, barfing out all the things that you can think of. Or you can be much more strategic and methodical around your approach. And this is something that we certainly do at the beginning of any of our 8-week programs, where we have everybody write down in a log, similar to what you might see on the screen in front of you, all of the cognitive slips that you are making over a period of time. We usually recommend 5 to 7 days. And so what that means is every time you make some type of cognitive slip, whatever you would consider to be a slip, you jot it down. You jot down the date, you jot down the time that it happened, what exactly was the slip, why do you think you made that mistake, and then what you could do to prevent the slip from happening in the future. And this type of diligent processing puts you in a position to then look at that list afterwards. And quite often people will find patterns, almost always very clear patterns emerge. The pattern might be around time of day. You might notice that there's particular times of day where you have greater difficulties and make more mistakes. You might find it might be related to your eating patterns or your medication patterns. So again, that could be around time of day. You may find that it has something to do with certain types of content. Some environments and some complexities of content are easier and you don't make nearly as many mistakes, and other types of content you do make more mistakes. So whatever style you prefer, I would encourage you to first think right now, what are the areas that you are looking to get out of this program or this session today to see some improvements in? And then after this particular presentation down the road, maybe take a little bit more detailed of an approach to really think through, these are the things that I would love to see improvement on. So I'm going to make a concerted effort to log them, identify them, and then actually make an effort to improve them using some of the techniques that we'll learn today. Just going to do a quick check to see if there's anything in the chat function that's coming up to me. Nope. All right. So without further ado, if everyone's ready, what we'll do is we'll go on to this multidimensional approach. So when I talk about a multidimensional approach to help people improve their brain function, to enhance cognitive well-being or take the fog out of brain fog, we tend to focus on 3 core areas: memory, task management, and psychological well-being. And I can't actually tell you which of these 3 areas is more important than the other, because the reality is it differs from person to person. We do have a set 8-week program that people will participate in, and we find that some people come away from it saying, wow, task management is really what made the difference for me. Others, it might be psychological well-being, and others, it might be memory. What I can tell you, though, is that most people tend to sign up for memory because it's their memory that they're concerned about. And most people find that they get greater gains in their memory and general cognitive function through the other 2 areas, task management and psychological well-being. So I do encourage you, I'm going to give you a snippet of each of these 3. I do encourage you to think about that and map that onto the areas where you think you might be wanting to see improvement or where you identify challenges, because different components of the program are designed specifically to address different kinds of challenges that people might face. So we will start with memory, because that's usually the topic of conversation that people are most interested in. And there are so many different ways to talk about memory. You might hear primary and secondary recall or free recall, episodic memory, semantic memory. You could study memory. You can have an entire career just looking at different types of memory and better understanding them. For our purposes, the dichotomy that we're going to be referring to is the encoding and the retrieval process. So at a very surface level, if you think about it, memories are encoded and retrieved through very complex interactions in our brain. But encoding is the process of getting information into your brain. And retrieval is the process of getting information out of your brain. And it's interesting because a lot of people don't recognize that if we put most of our eggs in the encoding basket, we're more likely to see greater gains in the retrieval. Because the reality is we cannot retrieve information that didn't get encoded into our brain in the first place. So when you want to make a strong effort to remember something, it's important that the bulk of that effort is put at the time that you're trying to process it and put it into your brain, or even if it's not put it into your brain, using an external strategy. And the better and the more sophisticated and the deeper you go at the encoding stage, the greater the likelihood that you can remember it at the retrieval stage. And that can be very frustrating for people because quite often the error is noted at the retrieval stage when you're trying to remember something. You know it's in there. You go to introduce your husband or your wife and you say, "This is my partner," and have a sudden blank of the name. It's not as though it's never been encoded. You're just having a pure retrieval error. But in other circumstances, you might not have put the effort into encoding it in the first place. So it really is important to think about these things. And so people will say, you know, "Heather, how do I encode information or retrieve information faster or better?" And I think what's really important to recognize is that there are many different factors that can in fact impact our ability to encode and retrieve, but most notably encode the information, get the information in. And if these factors are present, then they're certainly going to impact how the information gets into your brain, which is then going to have a domino impact on your ability to pull it out again. So some of these factors, for example, would be vision and hearing. You know, if the sound for this presentation was really quite shoddy, then it would be very difficult for you to process the content. Or if the screen and if you are only joining by phone and you don't see the screen, that might impact how much you're able to encode of the presentation because you're not getting the visual support. We definitely know that pain can have an impact on how we process information, how it gets into our brain. So quite often people will see this roller coaster phenomenon where sometimes they're better able to process information than other times of the day. And one of the factors that might be affecting that could be pain. It could be fatigue. We simply can't process as well when we're tired. It could in fact be our medication. So there are some medications that might make us feel a little bit foggier or a little bit more tired, and that will impact how well the information gets pulled into the brain. Certainly, attention. So if there's lots of distracting noise around or other types of distractions, then that's going to impact our ability to pay attention to what we're trying to encode. And then finally, mood. When we're not in a great mood, we tend to process information in a different way than when we are in a very good mood. And it's not that we process it worse. The interesting thing is that if you're in a terrible mood when you take information in, you will better remember that information when you're in a terrible mood again. So the more your mood is similar at both the encoding and the retrieval stage, the better the likelihood that you'll remember. So if you are having difficulties remembering information, the very first thing I would encourage you to do is go back to think about, you know, what was I doing when I was first learning this information? Was I distracted? Was I in pain? Could I hear it well? Was I tired? Was there something that was affecting me in the environment around? As soon as any of those factors are present, you can expect that there might be a greater difficulty remembering that information. But that doesn't help us get to how do we actually process this information more deeply. So generally speaking, there's two broad categories for how to process information. There are external strategies and internal strategies. More often than not, people like to focus their energy and pat themselves on the back when they internally just remember information, when they use a strategy like categorization, or story making, or a visual image. So the 6 that are listed in front of you on the internal strategies column are the 6 probably more popular techniques for improving how well somebody can remember information. So if you encode or process using these strategies, there'll probably be a greater likelihood that it will help you to retrieve the information in the long run, both immediately if you're tested immediately, and or in the long run. So over time, if somebody asked you a week later about that information. And there's no one strategy from the internals that's better than the other. In fact, it's a highly individualized process. Some people are simply very strong visually, and so they paint visual pictures in their head. Others might be story makers, and so they create stories around information that they're trying to remember. Others, on the other hand, might categorize. So you might find that you're breaking, a mental to-do list into the things I need to do now, the things that need to be done later, or grocery store, your fruits and vegetables versus your dairy items, etc. So each of these internal strategies are going to be individual, and it's really worthwhile exploring and better understanding what are your go-to strategies. If I were to present you with a whole bunch of information all of a sudden at once, let's say a list, how are you actually doing that? It's a great exercise to do. In fact, we're going to do that exercise. I'm going to show you a bunch of objects on the screen, and I'm going to ask you to do your best to remember them any way that seems natural to you. And then I want you to explore for yourself how many are you able to remember and what strategy may you or may you not have used. However, before we do that exercise, the first thing I'd like to do is really strongly emphasize external strategies. So the reason I've shaded this in or hopefully made it stand out a little bit more is because it's really important to recognize, as much as we might like to use our internal strategies and we pat ourselves on the back for doing them successfully, really where we see the greatest gains, where we have the most successes, is when we use external strategies. But for some reason, people think that they shouldn't be using external strategies. They think that they're actually exercising their brain better by using an internal strategy. But quite often, the use of an external strategy is a much more sophisticated use of the brain than an internal strategy. Because to use an external strategy, you need to plan and organize and think through how you're going to use it in addition to using it. And that's much more of a whole brain process. So wherever possible, it's in your best interest to try and use an external strategy. So if you have a paper and pencil available to you and somebody's giving you directions, why not use that paper and pencil and write them down? Why force yourself just to remember it in your head using a strategy? Because really the outcome you're looking for is to successfully get from A to B. It's not I successfully got from A to B because I remembered it in my head. Really the success measure is I got to where I'm supposed to be with very little being lost or confused. So when possible, try and use those external strategies. It's still important to feel confident in some internal strategies and to explore what those might be. But wherever possible, if you have a choice, I would encourage an external strategy over an internal strategy. So having said that, I would like to do one quick memory exercise before we go on to talk about task management. Because I would like you to take this opportunity to just explore for yourself what is your natural go-to strategy. If you were faced with a little memory exercise, and you don't need to share your results with anybody, but you're also welcome to add into the chat function how many you remembered if you wanted to, and then I'll be guiding some discussion through the chat function following as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 10 objects on the screen. I'm not even going to say out loud what they are. Actually, I will say out loud what they are in case people are joining just by phone. And what I'd like you to do is just try to remember them as best you can, any way you can. And when all 10 are done, take that as an opportunity to just try and think through which items do I remember. And I'll guide you to ask you to, okay, that's it. Now take a moment to think how many of these objects you can remember. Okay, and then we'll have a discussion around what different styles have been. And I did notice a chat just came in. Is this geared for caregivers or is this geared for people living with dementia? It's really geared for everybody. So most people will experience cognitive challenges at some point in their life, certainly as we get older. Some will experience more severe forms of cognitive difficulties, whether there's a disease process like an Alzheimer's disease or other going on. And really a lot of these strategies and techniques can be applied across the board for everybody who's experiencing some type of cognitive difficulties. Some might be a little bit challenging for others, and some might be a little bit too easy for other people. So here we go. I'm going to show you 10 objects. Use a technique, any type of strategy that you like to try and remember them, and then test yourself, see how many you can remember when we're done. Lipstick. Spoon. Cement truck. Cup. Lollipop. Comb. Makeup brush. Pacifier. Tea bag. Beach ball. Now just take a moment to think about the items. Now in your head or on paper, try and think through all the ones that you can remember. So how did that go? Sometimes it's hard to know how it went when you don't have the objects in front of you. So I'll share the objects so you can now measure your performance. Have a look at the items that you may have forgotten, that you had difficulty remembering. And take a moment to think through what was the strategy that you used, and feel free to use the chat function and share with us any information you want to share. If you're aware of a particular strategy, or if there's something that you noted that was interesting, an item that you forgot and you find it interesting that you forgot that. If you felt like sharing the number that you remembered, by all means, go ahead and do that. Okay, so it was a little bit too fast. Thank you for that feedback, Judy. Okay, other people are saying way too fast. It is tricky, isn't it? And to be honest with you, I went at that speed because we try to deliver exercises like this at the speed that conversation might be at, right? So while it's much more difficult when it's a whole series of items, the reality is that quite often people speak at that type of pace. And here we are trying to process and pull in information as we're having conversations with others. You know, it's really quite remarkable how well our brain can actually process conversations, especially when there's a group of people talking at the same time. So that was the reason for that particular speed, to try and imitate what normal social conversation speed might be. So we have from Maggie that she used both visual recall and word memory. So great, certainly a great start, identifying, you know, some natural skill sets that you have, what your go-to approach had been. I am curious, did anybody write the items down as we were going? Okay, perfect. I saw one person put their hand up. Great. I just explained that if you have a pen and paper, great, more people are putting their thumb up. If you have a pen and paper, I bet those people who wrote them down, they were able to remember all 10 of them, even if they had their list in front of them, right? So if you went to a grocery store, we wouldn't just challenge ourselves to remember all the items we need. We'd most likely write them down and use an external strategy. And in the absence of having a piece of paper to write it down, then you might want to use an internal strategy. But it's really beneficial to try and use an external strategy wherever possible. I'm going to give one more exercise, slightly different approach, just for those of you who may have discovered something about yourself in terms of how you are processing or encoding the information. So some of you may in fact have used categories. So for example, you may have thought there was makeup items there or bathroom items and put the lipstick and the comb and the makeup brush together. You may have thought kitchen items and put the spoon and the tea bag and the cup together. You may have thought children's items and thought the cement truck, the beach ball, and the pacifier, and maybe even the lollipop or the sucker. So that would be an example of categorization. So there's different ways people may have done it. And again, it's worthwhile trying to better understand your own approaches, because using those existing approaches can really help you in the long run. So having said that, this next exercise, I'm going to give you all of the items at the same time. So now you have an opportunity to process it in a slightly different way. Rather than them coming at you too fast, one at a time, you can take them all in, maybe make up a story, maybe create a visual picture for yourself, perhaps start categorizing them, probably wishing I would just be quiet so you could process the information. I am speaking as you do this to emphasize how difficult it can be to take in information and process deeply while somebody is talking or while there's background noise. So these are all things to consider when someone is having cognitive challenges. How can we minimize the distractions and the noise? How can we maximize the techniques and the strategies we ourselves use or that we support them to use? Did anybody have any interesting insights through that process or that exercise that they want to share? Okay, I'm looking from the previous list, items that people had forgotten. So someone had mentioned in the previous list that they'd forgotten the comb and the lollipop. So when you identify the items that you forgot, in fact, almost always some of the best information comes from what we've forgotten, not what we've remembered, because that can give us the greatest insight in terms of you know, if you used categories and lollipop didn't really fit in, then that's evidence that the use of categorization is working, because you didn't do anything with lollipop and therefore you forgot it. So it's showing you that these techniques and strategies are working. So Mary had asked, why is writing them down memory? Memory is a pretty broad term. So if we think of memory as just being encoding and retrieval as one of the dichotomies, writing it down is a process of helping to encode information in a deeper way. So even if you write it down and then throw the list away, there's a greater likelihood that that process of writing it down has increased the likelihood that you'll remember it later. So it is a technique for memory as well. I see people are grouping. Categorization is getting easier. Some others are now writing them all down, sorting them into similar items. So I'm seeing that there's lots of categorization going on. Lynn Murphy, thank you for sharing. You need quiet while concentrating. And I am sorry, I intentionally talked through that whole exercise just to expose everybody quickly to how frustrating that can be when we're trying hard to concentrate and there's noise going on in the background, in particular my voice. Lots of categorization, lots of great feedback here. Thank you very much, everyone. So if we quickly were to summarize the memory section, I just want to emphasize that, you know, when you are trying to focus on memory, and of course we're going to talk about task management and psychological well-being as well, and all of this comes together to together maximize your cognitive capacity. But from a pure memory perspective, it's really important to create that awareness of where your challenges may be. Evaluate your current strategy use. So I don't want to hear people saying, oh, I used to always do that when I worked and I don't do it now. Or I do that at work and I don't do that at home. The reality is if you have a strong technique that works in one environment, you want to adapt it for all of your other environments. Consider it the top tool in your toolbox. It's very worthwhile to learn and practice and review a variety of both internal and external strategies, focusing on external strategies wherever possible. And when I say review and learn and practice, you know, if you're at the bank and the bank teller has their name tag on, while they go and get your money, why not use a little exercise at that point in time to try and remember their name? Why not take advantage of that time to practice a technique in your head or to write it down? Because every time you do that, you're actually helping to exercise your brain. And more often than not, people will discover that they use combinations. So in the feedback in the chat, we saw some people were using both visual memory as well as categorizing, or a story and categorizing. So quite often, many people will use multiple techniques at the same time, which is really a sophisticated use of the brain. But what you're doing is you're actually processing it at a deeper and deeper level when you do that. So the key is to practice, practice, practice. Be aware of where the challenges are. Expose yourself to where your talents are. Make up for your weaknesses by using those talents and those strengths, and then practice wherever possible. If we move into talking a little bit about task management. So task management, just as from a definition perspective, the way we are defining task management through this particular program is the goal is to help to reduce those feelings of overwhelm by using a technique called simplifying. So as we get older, or if we're experiencing cognitive difficulties, whether it's a general brain fog or something more specific to a disease process, you know, it can very easily catch up to you where you feel very overwhelmed by things that you know didn't used to overwhelm you before. So I know the concept of having a whole bunch of people for dinner and preparing a 5-course meal is much more overwhelming for me now than it was in my 30s. Task management is also about helping how we manage both our small and our large daily tasks. And what you're doing in task management is you're really trying to promote this present-minded state as opposed to an absent-minded state. So more often we find that people are, you know, their mind is one place while they're doing something else. So they're absent-minded. And that's definitely going to impact how well we function because we're not really paying attention to what we're doing. And then the final goal of task management, so the 4-step process I'm going to show you is designed to address all of these, which is to help reduce susceptibility to distractions and interference. So those kinds of distractions when you go upstairs to get something and you get to the top of the stairs and you're suddenly distracted by something else and you've forgotten what you went up there to do. So the task management process I'm going to teach you is designed to help deal with feelings of overwhelm, help manage large and small tasks, help promote a present-minded as opposed to an absent-minded state, and help to reduce distractions and interference or get you back on task as fast as possible if you do get distracted. So it's a pretty tall order for 4 simple steps in a very short presentation like this. So here are the steps. 4 simple steps, and I've had lots of people tell me that just stop and clarify alone have really changed their life. So the 4 steps are stop. The 2nd step is to clarify. The 3rd step is to simplify. And the 4th step is to monitor. So in more detail, the stopping mechanism is that concept of upon completion of any task, or when you move from one task, one activity, one room to the next, it's really worthwhile to take that second, to take a deep breath and pull your mind to the present. Because so often we move on autopilot and we go from one thing to the next that our mind is lagging behind our actions, or our actions are lagging behind our mind, and we're doing things that are inconsistent with what we're thinking. So the best way to get into that present-minded state is take that natural transition from activity to activity, from TV show to TV show, room to room, to just stop for a second and take that deep breath. And then you may have a catchphrase that you find you use. I certainly have a catchphrase. Mine is, in fact, Whoa Nelly. So a catchphrase is a term that you're more likely to say than anything else more often. So you take this moment, you stop, you take your deep breath, you say your catchphrase, and essentially what you're doing is you're clearing your mind. You're wiping your blackboard clean. And once you've done that, you're in a position to move into the next step, which is clarify. So now that you've got this clean slate that you're working with, and you're in a present-minded state, you can ask yourself one or two, maybe three simple questions, such as, where am I going? Or what was I doing? Or what was the goal here? Right? So you're going from this sort of fuzzy chicken without a head running around state, stopping, clearing your mind, bringing your mind to the present, and then targeting what it is you're focusing on. And then depending on the answer to that question, what you're about to do might in fact be something that's quite complex. So the next step would be to, wherever possible, break steps down, break things into simple, manageable steps. The reality is nothing is overwhelming if it's broken down into enough steps. We could all do our taxes quite easily if we just broke it down into step after step after step. I'm not saying that each step will be an easy step, but the thought of preparing and getting everything ready for taxes can be overwhelming for some people, but step by step, it becomes a process that's much more manageable. So the minute you find yourself procrastinating, or you're feeling that sort of clench in your throat, which is, I can't do this, this is too hard for me, stop, take a deep breath, clarify, and say, all right, how am I going to break this down? What are the steps I need to go through to get me from what I want to do and to actually executing it? And then sometimes we can become quite caught up in what we're doing or get distracted, as I said. So the fourth step is the monitor. So on a regular basis, if you're doing one thing for a prolonged period of time, you want to monitor where you are. So periodically you would stop, you would clarify again, where am I going, what am I doing? You would monitor your progress against whatever that goal is. Because quite often one thing will lead to another, which will lead to another, and before you know it, you're very far from what you originally intended to do, and it's hard to pull yourself back. But this process of stopping and clarifying and monitoring where you are can really help. So for example, if you have 5 minutes to go into a store to do something, then you want to stop and clarify before you get in to the store of what you're going in to do, so that you don't get distracted by the other items that are there, things that are on sale. If you do find yourself getting distracted, you quickly stop and clarify again. You monitor your progress. Oh, right, I'm just here to pick up the sheets. I have 5 minutes and I have to go. So it's a way of managing overwhelm, managing distractions, taking large tasks and working them into smaller tasks, and really being present-minded about what you're doing. And if we were to take that 4-step process and apply it to a fairly, I wouldn't call this a common scenario, but the kinds of decision-making scenarios that we sometimes face, I want you to think for a moment and feel free to add to the chat box what you would do in this situation. So let's say you have your 40-year high school reunion on the same date as an out-of-town wedding of a close family friend. What would you do? I'll give you a moment to think about what you might do, and feel free to type it in there. If you choose not to type it in, that's fine. As we wait, I'll just respond to the comment by Maria Lynn. The biggest challenge is getting lost in the rabbit hole of the internet or Facebook. Absolutely. Stop and clarify can really save you from that. So if you sit down to just look something up on Facebook for 10 minutes and you find 4 hours later, it's now 2 in the morning and you're looking at the migrating habits of polar bears, stop and clarify would have been an opportunity to say every 10 minutes or so, you're just going to take a deep breath and check in on what you're doing. So you're not getting distracted, or when you do get distracted, you're pulling yourself back into what the goal was. Okay, so in terms of the response to this scenario, some people are writing they'd go to the wedding. A couple of people have commented that they would prioritize which is more important. So, and there's never any right or wrong answers here. I just want to encourage you to think about the fact that even though the answer may have been simple or obvious to you, depending on your high school, your family relationships, weddings, etc., it might have been a pretty quick response for you. But what's really important is no matter how fast or easy it seems, there's still value in stopping and clarifying. We don't need to make decisions as fast as we do, unless it's a life or death situation. We should always have the 2 seconds it takes to stop, take a deep breath, clear our mind, then ask yourself questions like, what's the priority? What's more important here? And then you can simplify. There might be all kinds of other factors here. Maybe you were part of the high school reunion committee. Maybe you've promised other people you were going or they're staying with you. Maybe the out-of-town wedding is somewhere that's super far away and it's cost prohibitive. Maybe it's the 5th wedding of this person. Maybe there'll be 1,000 people at the wedding. They won't even notice if you're there. Of course, these are a variety of things that you would know because it would be your own personal situation, but we can't ever consider everything all at once. Our brain just doesn't do that. So no matter what, when we're facing decisions, even if the answer seems obvious, there's no harm in stopping and clarifying and simplifying and monitoring. But there is harm in not doing that because we can sometimes make poor decisions. So here's another example for you. You're trying to book an important doctor's appointment, but the only date available is when you have a dentist appointment. What do you do? Again, it might seem obvious. It's written in a deceptive way, so important doctor's appointment might push you towards saying that's more important. But again, there's no harm in stopping, clarifying, and simplifying. When did you decide it was an important doctor's appointment? 6 months ago? Are you currently experiencing tooth pain? Is there a cost for canceling one and not the other? How soon can you get into the other one? Right? This process of stopping, clearing your mind and being in a present-minded state so you can focus in on what you're doing is really where you'll see some of the greatest benefits to managing your tasks. And that actually has a domino effect on just pure memory and how well you remember information. And together, they have an impact on our overall cognitive functioning, which is why this is a multidimensional program. We cannot improve our brain function simply by trying to improve memory strategies. We need to improve and focus on overall task management as well, if that's an area that you're having difficulty in. And then for the final section, I spoke about this as being a 3-pronged or a multidimensional program. We've talked about memory, we've talked about task management, and now we'll talk briefly about psychological well-being, which is referring to the way an individual feels about themselves, others, and their environment around them. And it can include a whole bunch of different constructs. The ones that this program was designed specifically to address are feelings of control, confidence, level of engagement, coping, and optimism. And quite often when people are trying to improve their cognitive capacity or clear their brain fog, they don't realize how important psychological well-being is to that process. It's just as, and for some people, it's more important than pure memory strategies or task management. Because what we do know is that how well we think is directly related to how well we feel. Research has shown us that when people are feeling good, they tend to think a lot clearer. And when they're not feeling great about themselves, they tend to not think as well. So if you really want to maximize your cognitive capacity, you want to be working on some of these memory and task management strategies. You also want to be working on your psychological well-being, and you're inching your way up, working on both at the same time, or all three in this case at the same time. And there are many factors that can affect our psychological well-being. Oddly enough, you'll see that these are similar factors that can affect how we process information, our encoding. So when we're in pain and when we're fatigued, we tend to not think as well. We tend to not feel great about ourselves, and we tend to not think as well. Other factors that can affect psychological well-being may be exercise. So some questions: if you find you're feeling a little bit low or down in the dumps and you're noticing that your cognitive status is a little bit lower at that same time, think, has there been changes to your exercise habits? Are you exercising more or less than you used to? Or have there been changes to your nutrition? Is your balance what you're normally eating? Or are there other things going on in your life? Have there been some challenges and stresses in your relationships that's impacting how you're viewing your life and your value and your meaning? All of these are going to impact how we feel about ourselves as people, and how we feel about ourselves as people is going to impact how well we think. And because the two are so strongly correlated, the interesting part with correlation is I can't tell you that I think well because I'm feeling good, or I'm feeling good and therefore I'm thinking well. We don't know which causes which. We just know that they're strongly related. So we want to make sure we're focusing on both. And what often happens is people can get themselves caught up in this. So somebody earlier mentioned, the rabbit hole of the internet and Facebook. Excuse me. People can also get into this rabbit hole, or this self-fulfilling prophecy, where one thing leads to a next. Excuse me, and that impacts how we feel about ourselves. So some people might say, I'm having memory problems because I'm getting older, or I have dementia, or I have a cancer-related brain fog, or there's been a stroke. So as soon as we start to attribute a challenge to something that we feel we don't have control over, something that's happened to us, then we're giving up feelings of control. And people have a tendency to generalize that loss of control to other aspects of their life. So they start to lose confidence in general in thinking and carrying out the things that they want to do. Excuse me. And that's when we start to see a disengagement. People start to reduce their activities. They start to reduce socializing. They start to reduce their independence. And so they tend to cope by avoiding mental and physical challenges. And in their head, they're saying things like, that can't happen, that won't work, I can't do that. It's a very negative frame of mind and a very pessimistic outlook on life, which can lead to anxiety and depression. And we know that these can lead to increased cognitive complaints. So we're creating this vicious, negative spiraling cycle just by our own thought process about where we started. And this often happens when people are facing life changes, diagnoses, etc. So you really want to focus on that, and you want to focus on reversing that trend. I'm in control of my life. I might not be in control of the fact that I don't have work, or that my partner has been diagnosed with dementia, or that I have a cancer-related brain fog from some aspect of the cancer, but I have control over my life. And I'm confident that there are techniques and strategies and things that I can do to improve my own functioning. And because of that, I'm going to continue to engage in all of the activities I enjoy. So when I encounter those challenges or those difficult situations, I'm able to cope. In my head, I'm thinking, I can do this. I'm going to figure out how. I need to find somebody to help me do this. But it's a more positive, more optimistic frame of mind, which can increase cognitive capacity, because the better we're feeling about ourselves, the better we think. So when you think about those 5 constructs that I talked about, control, confidence, engagement, coping, and optimism, you can either be spiraling in a positive direction or a negative direction. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that it's easy, you just flip a switch. It's really important that you take notice of these things, whether you're thinking about it for yourself or if you're supporting somebody that's having some of these challenges, and you try to focus on the more positive approach. And one way that I recommend people doing that is, I love this exercise. I love it working with people when I ask them, okay, I want you to just write down, barf out on a page, all the things you can think of that you want to do that have been hanging over you. It could be simple things like you have glasses that sit funny on your face because the arm is a little bit bent, and every time you put them on your face, you say, ugh, I need to go get it fixed. Or it could be big stuff, like all those things that kind of bug you. Just write them all down and then pick one of them, and use everything that I just taught you in task management. Take a deep breath, identify what the goal is, break that one item down into a series of little steps to get it done and complete it. And then move on to the next. We do this in all of our programs, and we see an incredible change in people because they ride the high of whether it was a big task or a little task, getting something accomplished. Some people will say, I wasn't able to get that done long before my cancer diagnosis, and I'm getting it done now, or long before something else happened. So that feeling of empowerment helps to reverse that positive approach to life and helps to improve psychological well-being. So that's just one example of something you can do, and it's certainly something that you can do together with somebody else. So just to quickly summarize, so maximizing cognitive capacity, or helping to take the fog out of brain fog, almost always requires a multidimensional approach. It's not just about memory or task management or psychological well-being. It is about creating awareness of the challenges, be introspective and reflect on, where am I having difficulties, or where do I want to see improvements, or what do I wish I still did as well as I did when I was younger. Focus on how you're encoding information. How are you taking information in the world around you and pulling it into your brain? And what strategies, external and internal strategies, are you relying on to do that? How can you practice those to make them stronger? Don't forget about task management. Please stop. Take that deep breath. Clear your mind so you're in a present-minded state, and then act. And most certainly pay attention to your psychological well-being, because if you can focus on feeling good about yourself and your environment, you will see an upside in cognitive capacity as well. Thank you.
Thank you again, Heather.